Alright, our joke for today is what clothes does a house wear? What clothes does a house wear? I'll draw a house while you think about that. It's a dress. Do you get it? Like the dress that you would wear, like this kind of dress right here, but it's like a house dress. Beautiful. With some polka dots. Alright, your frame looks like this. We are going to fill that out today. Solving two-step equations. Last week we focused on solving one-step equations. This week we'll be doing two-step equations. So we still are going to be applying inverse, that spells inverse, I know, operations, and we're going to do it in the reverse order of the order of operations, or what we like to call unwrapping x. Okay? So applying inverse operations in the reverse order using the order of operations, or unwrapping x. Our first example here, we're going to talk about the operation performed on the variable and the operations that we need to do to isolate the variable. When we think about operation performed on the variable, we're going to think about germ DOS. So looking at x, what would we do first? Well, first we would want to do the dividing by 2. So step 1, divide by 2. Then we would do the adding 5. So step 2, add 5. Now in order to isolate the variable, you have to reverse the order and do the inverse. So to reverse, we're going to do number 2 goes to 1. And to inverse it, we have to subtract 5. So when we subtract 5, that would get rid of that adding 5. We're left with x divided by 2. So then we would want to inverse number 1, and we would want to multiply by 2. Remember to pause. That should say multiply by 2. Number 2 should say multiply by 2. If you need to pause it all, remember to make sure you pause to write things down. Okay, again, we're going to follow germ DOS. We're looking at that x. And with the x, we're multiplying by 5 first. So multiply by 5 is our step 1. If we do germ DOS, then we would add the 9. Remember, we're going to reverse the order. So we reverse it, 2 becomes 1, and we inverse it. Inverse means you do the opposite. You subtract 9. Again, then that would get rid of the adding 9. We're left with 5x. Then you would divide by 5. Okay? So again, you divide by 5. Again, you would have this 4y, so that would mean you're multiplying by 4 first. Then we have the subtracting 4, so we would subtract 4. We're going to reverse the order, inverse the operation. Subtract becomes add, so you add 4, that gets rid of the subtracting 4. Then we would deal with number 1, which was now number 2, and divide by 4. Okay, last example. And then we would just be left with y. Last example. Here is for germ DOS, we do have a grouping symbol, that long fraction line. So we're going to first subtract 7, just like in a grouping symbol, you have to do that first. And then we would do the divide by 3. Dividing by 3 becomes the first thing to do. We inverse it by saying multiply by 3. Then we inverse the subtracting 7, and that becomes add 7. Alright, so then so what? We have watch out for grouping symbols. Really important, because usually it's easy to say that you are going to always add or subtract to get rid of that first, and then multiply or divide and get rid of that. But those grouping symbols you really have to pay attention to. Alright, let's flip this over to the back side. On the back side, we were working on properties. We're going to be explaining the steps to solve equations. So this is just like how we did with our one step. We're going to take our time. We're going to go through all of the justifications why we are writing things down. So here on our left side, we're going to have 2x plus 5, which is equal to 25. That is our given. It was given to us. We don't have a other really good reason to write it down. Alright, we want to get rid of the minus 5 first. Just like how when we went through forward with our x, we would multiply by 2, then add 5. So we're going to subtract 5. That's our inverse property of, we want to get rid of adding. So it's inverse property of addition. We then subtract 5 to the other side, because once you do one to the other, you have to do it one side, you have to do it to the other. That's our equality property of subtracting. Then we actually compute 2x equals 20, because 25 minus 5 is 20. That is compute. Struggling with that P. Alright, then we want to get x by itself. This now turns into a one-step equation, which we've been working on. So 2x divided by 2, we want to get rid of the multiplying, so inverse property of multiplying. We divide by 2 on the other side for our equality property of division. So we end up with x equals 10, 1 times x equals 10, which that we computed, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, 20 divided by 2 is 10. We end up with x equals 10, and that is our identity property. 1 times x equals x, identity property of multiplication. We're going to check, and in order to check, what we do is we put that 10 in for the x. So we get 2 times 10 plus 5 equals, and we want it to hopefully equal 25, so we put a question mark there, hoping that that's going to come true. So we do 2 times 10, which is 20, plus 5 equals 25. Is that true? Well, 20 plus 5 is 25, so we get 25 equals 25. Alright, we are going to finish the rest of this frame tomorrow in class, so be ready to do that.